Imminent 34 de Guahan is now called to order. Can I please ask for Senator Nelson to please lead us in prayer for the
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Father, we give you praise for this day. We thank you for the blessings that you have given us in our life. We ask that you guide us this week, that you give us the gift of discernment and wisdom and the grace of humility. We also pray that you help us to make the right decisions for our island and for the people that we serve. We ask this praying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Would Senator Lee please now lead us in the Milagro na Sacrificio.
On behalf of the grateful island and country, we honor U.S. Navy Native Coxswain Vicente Camacho Blas and the family of Native Coxswain Vicente Camacho Blas for making the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense of our island and country. Inifresi, ginini mastakulu, ginasoku, imastakulum gikurasonhu, zanimas figu, naninasenyahu, hu fresen maisadzu, parabai protehi, zani defendi, ihinengi, ikutura, ilengwahi, airi, hanum, zanitanu samoru, niren shaku duretsu ginanazzu ustata, estihu afitma gihilui biblia, zani banderahu, banderan Guahan.
Would Senator Estevez please lead us in the Guam hymn and Senator Munya in the national anthem. Would the clerk please call roll?
Senator Atta, Senator Uggan, Senator Castro, Speaker Cruz, Senator Espadon, Senator Esteves, Senator Lee, Senator Morrison, Senator Muñoz, Senator Nelson, Senator Rodriguez, Senator San Augustine, Senator San Nicolas, Vice Speaker Terlahi, Senator Torres. Mr. Speaker, there is a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move to approve the legislative journals dated July 24th, 2017, August 4th, and August 14th, 2017, and September 16, 2017, subject to corrections.
On the motion to approve the legislative journals dated July 24th, 2017, August the 4th, August the 14th, September the 16th, 2017, any objections? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motions that communications and petitions be appended to today's journal, hearing no objections, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, there are messages from Imagalahin Guahan, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion, the messages from Imagalahin Guahan be appended to today's session journal, hearing no objections, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, there are reports of standing committees, and I move that they also be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion, the reports of standing committees be appended to today's session journal, hearing no objection. Motion carries. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Speaker, there are no reports of select committees. Mr. Speaker, I move that bills introduce bills number 163-34LS through 167-34LS and 168-34COR through 188-34COR, and resolutions introduced numbers 198-34LS through 212-34LS and 213-34COR through 245-34COR, and certificates introduced, certificate numbers 122-34LS through 126-34LS and 127-34COR through 139-34COR be deemed to have been given their first reading.
On that motion, hearing no objections, so ordered. Mr. Majority Leader.
I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions and legislative certificates introduced today and for the remainder of this legislative session be considered first read and adopted, and to allow the legal counsel to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
On that motion, hearing no objection, so ordered. Mr. Majority. Oh, Senator Morrison.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the objections of the Committee on the Rules, I move to add Bill 138 as substituted by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform to the session agenda. Mr. Speaker, Bill 138 is an act to amend Section 61542 of Chapter 61, Division 2, Title 21, Guam Code annotated relative to the regulation of political signs. Mr. Speaker, Bill 138 has met all requirements of the Committee on Rules. It also has went through 2 public hearings held on these past 2 months, and a committee report was filed with the clerk's office in a time to be considered for placement on this month's agenda. Mr. Speaker, the as substituted Bill 138 as substituted has also been reviewed by the legal counsel with an amendment prepared to address political signs that are temporarily on public property and are in conjunction with roadside waving. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask that my colleagues support this motion and allow for debate to proceed.
We are in motion, and on that motion, is there any objection to that motion? Hearing none, so ordered. Mr. Majority Leader? Senator Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to place resolution number 228-34 as substituted on the floor on session agenda, and then it be placed at the top of the second reading file.
On the motion to accept, Senator.
Procedural is to place it on the session agenda. This request first.
Okay. On the motion to place on the session agenda, any objections? I see Senator Uggin's hand up. Senator Uggen?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I certainly stand in recognition of the good senator's sponsorship of the resolution number 228-34 and the intent behind it. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm looking at a version of the resolution as substituted on the floor that appears materially different with the same concept, but materially different from the original resolution. And based on law, my understanding is that any time that there's a significant amendment to a resolution or a piece of legislation, that it has to go back to the community for additional public hearing. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to raise that as a concern. But the one question I have, Mr. Speaker, with regards to this resolution is the sense of urgency. We've heard from family members of Litegzen, and we've heard some concerns that they shared at the public hearing, which I was fortunate enough to sit in for about an hour, and then I've had the opportunity to read some of the contents of the committee report. But, Mr. Speaker, with this, the significant nature of this resolution, which would be an expression of the legislative body, we need to have healthy dialogue with the parties at a table so that, in fact, everyone understands the nature of some of the things that are taking place. One of the comments, Mr. Speaker, if I may, that was stated was that this is urgent and we need to place this on the agenda because the bulldozing started on the 21st and also started as of yesterday. I received confirmation from a representative from Joint Region Marianas that the bulldozing is not imminent within the near future because it still has to go through a process. So, Mr. Speaker, with that statement about the sense of urgency because the bulldozing is taking place, I have to take deference as to the urgency of this resolution. I did hear, though, well, let me first of all continue along that track. Because, Mr. Speaker, I shared a little earlier that we need to have healthy dialogue with the players, the stakeholders, as it applies to this particular issue. And I have already communicated with Joint Region Marianas about them participating in a roundtable discussion with stakeholders, with families that are directly impacted by the proposed military construction, and that will be scheduled within the required time frame according to law for the public hearing. Mr. Speaker, we need to have good, healthy dialogue with these individuals, especially as it deals with the military buildup. And because I've already received confirmation from Joint Region Marianas that they are willing to send their experts so that they can respond to questions from members of this body, I believe that it's too soon to entertain this resolution until we actually hear from them and we receive the facts with regards to the military buildup. But you know what kind of even perturbs me a little bit more, Mr. Speaker, is that I heard that the rush of this resolution is because a couple of members of this body will be attending the United Nations, visiting the United Nations next week, and this is what I heard, and that this resolution could conceivably be presented to the United Nations. But I need to state for the record, the United Nations is not going to return the properties of the Litegzan families back, the land back to their families, the previous landowners. And the United Nations is not going to impact the process that is internal within Department of Defense and, in this case, the community of Guam. So, Mr. Speaker, I asked the good sponsor if she would consider holding off discussion on this resolution until we have that healthy dialogue with our military partners so that the facts can be laid out and there would be a good understanding as to exactly what is taking place, when it's taking place, and what procedures have been followed. And with every single member of this legislative body given the opportunity to ask questions directly to our military partners, but also the invitation will be extended to the families and the stakeholders that will be directly impacted by this military buildup at Northwest Field as well as Finnegaza. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to share those concerns because if we're rushing this, knowing full well that already there are plans for a roundtable discussion so that we can have a healthy discussion and dialogue with the direct players in this military buildup, Joint Region Marianas, our military partners, the families that are directly affected with Litegzan, as well as Finnegaza, I think it's only prudent that we either, because of the nature of this resolution, that we suspend discussion on this resolution until such time that we hear from these individuals that I just mentioned. So, Mr. Speaker, I render a concern about proceeding directly with entertaining this resolution, knowing full well that there's an opportunity to sit and to dialogue with our military partners and with our families collectively at a table in which that invitation will also be extended to the office of the governor. So, Mr. Speaker, I close my comments based on that. Thank you very much.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if that was an objection, but I would like to clarify some things. Yesterday, we sat and we deliberated this resolution, finding the most feasible way as a body that we can make a loud voice representing the people of Guam to show that we are united as a body. We committed to that all day yesterday. Now, the round table that is addressed, the landowners, the researchers, the doctors, the sociological doctors went and met
with the Rear Admiral to share their concerns. And in a public hearing, they said that they felt that their concerns were ignored. They even went to Adelup, and they couldn't meet with the governor. Now, for whatever reason, that the concern is whether this resolution is self-motivated, because some people are going to the United Nations. I clearly read out in the letter, in our public hearing, why it was very time sensitive. I don't have the letter with me, but there was a letter from the Department of Navy naming a timeline of what was going to take place. I'm sorry, it was the Department of Justice.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker. If I may, with the good senator, I received confirmation in writing that in fact the bulldozing will not take place within the next month or so. So, Mr. Speaker, in regards to boots on ground and who is actually overseeing the project, I would anticipate that Joint Region Marianas, as of this morning, would have been providing the most current information with regards to any bulldozing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's take about 2 minutes. Both of you, please provide both of those documents in writing so that we can look at them, and then we'll proceed. We're back on the record. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe we were discussing the placing resolution number 228-34 as substituted on the floor on the session agenda, and that it be placed at the top of the second reading file.
We'll take it seriatim on whether or not it's going to be accepted. The substituted version first has to be accepted. And once we accept it, then it may be placed on the agenda. And after it's placed on the agenda, we'll determine where on the agenda. And so on the motion to accept, is there an objection to hearing on the motion to accept? Senator Nicholas, you're objecting. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in light of the sentiments that were shared by Senator Uggan with respect to the proposed substitute resolution 228, I'm very interested in this roundtable discussion that he's looking at putting together. Resolution 228 should be discussed further as substituted, or as the substitute is being proposed, because it is, in my opinion, quite different from the original resolution 228 that was introduced. And you know, there's been some inferences that the issue of this firing range has fallen on deaf ears, that meetings have taken place and people aren't being listened to. But Mr. Speaker, we are all in receipt of testimony from the Department of the Navy, 8 pages long. It's the most elaborate testimony, in my opinion, from any single individual on the original resolution 228. It's from the Rear Admiral herself, the commander. And this 8-page testimony...
Excuse me. We're going to be spending the whole time discussing this resolution. So it's the chair is going to be recognizing the majority leader to place the rest of the agenda. We'll deal with the agenda, and at the bottom of the agenda, we'll address this. Thank you. Mr. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, if I may. Did we accept the resolution, the substitute, or are we voting on it?
I'm ruling it out of order at this point. We can deal with it after we hear the rest of the agenda for this week's session.
So does that mean that my request to put it at the front of the agenda is denied?
We're still in motions. I want to hear first what else is on the motions.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to hear the motions first. I don't know why we keep...
So I should sit down and...
Please.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I think we have basically completed what needs to be taken up under motions. And of course, where we left off was adding Bill 138 on the agenda. And then that was when the sponsor of Resolution 228 rose and asked to add a Resolution 228 on the agenda with further qualification that it be placed at the top of the agenda.
You also have a couple of nominations you should place on, and then I'll deal with that.
I'm sorry.
Place the 2 nominations on, and 4 nominations.
Well, under the legislative concurrence, then we will move to the legislative concurrence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Speaker, point of information. Can we... It seems that I just want to ask, are we skipping the motions, the opportunity for me to give a motion?
No, we're not. I just wanted to make sure that we have completed, we have the agenda for today, and your motion is to accept your resolution. And it sounds like we're going to debate the whole thing before we even get to it. And so I'm just trying to get whether or not we're going to move forward with this, with your motion to accept. Can we just have an objection without going through the whole discussion?
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I still don't understand.
I'm trying to get us started, but all we are is stuck in motions at this point. And I'm trying to get us to the accepting of the motion and then the substitution, accepting the substitute and then to place on the agenda. But even before it's placed on the agenda, we're discussing this whole thing. We're spending the last 2 hours on this. And we're getting to all the points, and if we can hold off on everything until...
So, Mr. Speaker, gosh, my understanding that for the substitute resolution, it has to be accepted, and that's where we're stuck at.
Yes, and Senator San Nicolas was getting up and doing a whole soliloquy on the motion, and I'm just trying to, can we just hold off on the discussion?
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
The motion was to accept the resolution. A previous speaker was allowed to speak as to why he felt that that new resolution is different, and I was doing the same. So the inference that it was some kind of inappropriate soliloquy, I find
No, it's not inappropriate. It's just spending so much time with it. We might as well just have it at the top of the agenda, because we're spending all that time on it.
I think that there is actually merit to debating whether or not the actual substitute resolution should be accepted, given how dramatically different it is. And I'm personally of the opinion that perhaps we should just adopt the original resolution, as opposed to moving forward with this new version. If we're going to move forward with this new version, I think that it behooves us to clearly understand whether or not the differences between what was heard publicly and what is being substituted right now should in fact warrant the acceptance of this new resolution, given the fact that the military provided an 8-page testimony on the previous resolution, but wasn't afforded an opportunity to provide any kind of comment on this substitute version. If we're trying to get the facts in order to vote, make an informed vote on this measure, I think that we need to discuss whether or not accepting this without a public hearing is warranted. And that's why I'm raising these questions, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. On the motion to accept, any other senator wish to be heard? The motion to accept the substitute, that's the motion before us right now. Because first, there is an objection? I thought you just did. You're recognized, Senator Nicholas.
So just to clarify first, as a point of order, Mr. Speaker, we are entertaining the motion to accept the substitute version. On that motion, I request the permission to speak by the chair on the motion to accept.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. We either are going to have a motion under motions to place a bill on the agenda, and I think that's what we're doing, not debating whether to accept the substitute version.
But in order to get it on the agenda, I have to, if it's going to be substituted, there has to be an acceptance of the substitute version before we get to the agenda, before it gets there.
Mr. Speaker.
That's my understanding. Don't we have to accept the substitute version first?
Mr. Speaker, it only states, that the public hearing may be required for bills amended or substituted on the floor. It doesn't say anything about the resolutions in our Committee on Rules.
But the procedure is to accept a substitute. We'll take a short break. Get back. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the previous motion made, and I'd like to.
On the motion to withdraw, any objection? Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion, notwithstanding House rules, to place resolution number 228-34 on the session agenda.
On the motion to place resolution 228-34 on the session agenda.
Mr.
Thank
Speaker, I'd like to make another motion to place resolution 228-34 at the top of the second reading file.
On the motion to place at the top of the reading of the session agenda, is there any objection to having it placed at the top of the agenda? There's been an objection raised.
Will we vote?
All those in favor of placing the motion, the resolution at the top of the agenda, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. Mr. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to place the following appointments from the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform, the nomination of Stephen R. Hollister to serve as a member of the Guam Environmental Protection Agency Board of Directors with a recommendation to do confirm, to be placed in the voting file.
On the motion to place the nomination of Mr. Hollister, hearing no objections. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the Committee on Culture and Justice, on the nomination of Peter Alexis Ada to serve as Director of the Department of Youth Affairs with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion?
Correction on that. It's from the Committee on Labor. Committee on Labor, Innovation, Committee on Innovation, Workforce, and Youth Development, with a recommendation to do confirm to be placed in the voting file.
On that motion, hearing no objection.
So we're now in second reading.
We're on second reading. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, just a request if we can have the original resolution 228 circulated. I don't have a copy.
Oh, it's not been circulated?
We circulated the substitute, but we do not have the original now, which is now what we will be debating. So if I could request it be circulated.
Thank you. We'll take a short recess. Senator Nelson, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to accept resolution number 228-34 as substituted on the floor.
On the motion to accept, we're in second reading. That's the proper motion. Any objection to?
Just a point of inquiry, Mr. Speaker, as substituted on the floor? I don't have an as substituted on the floor version of resolution 228. I'm getting confused now as to what resolution is being moved to be accepted.
I'll help you.
The one that's marked as substituted on the floor.
So we're going back to the original.
No.
We're going to the substitute.
Mr. Speaker, I'm
What
getting...
was placed on the agenda was Bill 226. I mean, that was placed. But when we get to second reading, the proper motion, if there's going to be a substitution, is the author rises and says, I move to accept the substituted version. And if there's an objection to the substitution, I am willing to hear the objection to the substitution.
So rather than entertaining the motion to substitute resolution 228 under motions, we're now entertaining that motion under the second reading.
Rather than what?
When we were under motions, there was a motion to accept resolution 228 as substituted on the floor.
Yes, that was premature. It should have just been a motion to place the number 228 on the agenda. And the number 228 has been placed on the agenda.
So now we're making a
she's
motion to substitute it with this
Correct.
new version.
Yes.
On that motion?
There's been an objection. On the motion to object, did you wish to be heard on it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, please. Mr. Speaker, there's an we have a resolution 228-34, and then we have a resolution 228-34 as substituted on the floor. I'm just articulating this for clarity's sake. The motion is to substitute the resolution 228 that was already publicly heard with this version that is before us right now.
Correct.
And I'm rising with several concerns because I believe that the resolution 228-34 is different from this version that we are now seeking to adopt and replace it with. And I'll just read the titles. The original resolution 228-34 was relative to addressing the protection of the environmental and cultural resources of the northern coastline of Guam and prohibiting the construction of the live fire training range complex at Northwest Field. That's the original. The new one is relative to calling for a pause on construction and pre-construction activities related to the U.S. Department of the Navy's proposed live fire training range complex at Northwest Field until final determinations are made by the U.S. Department of Defense as to the series of associated live fire training ranges in Guam and the CNMI, and all related active litigation is resolved in order to ensure the protection of the environmental and cultural resources of the northern coastline of Guam. I rise with concerns, Mr. Speaker, because while the original resolution makes a very clear-cut statement of intent that it seeks to prohibit the firing range because of the cultural and environmental resources there, this second resolution now seeks to pause those construction and pre-construction activities until certain things are adjudicated in the CNMI. And the concern is that if these things are adjudicated in the CNMI and the outcome results in something that may or may not impact the military buildup, then the entire buildup could change. In the original 228-34, as I was mentioning several times earlier in this session, Mr. Speaker, we have 8 pages worth of testimony from the U.S. Department of Navy concerning the original 228-34. They have not been able to provide us with any kind of feedback with respect to whether or not the cases in the CNMI do or do not have any bearing on the buildup plans here on Guam. While there have been previous statements by the Department of Defense, I think that the willingness of the Department of the Navy to be able to provide us with something as elaborate as an 8-page testimony for the original resolution 228, I would like to take up what was previously mentioned by my colleague, the senator from Zotnia, with respect to a roundtable discussion where we can pose these questions to the Department of Defense. I really would like to have these guys sitting here, I mean, just to speak very plainly, Mr. Speaker, have these guys sitting here and ask them very plainly, does the cases in the CNMI have any bearing on what your plans are here on Guam? Simple. And if they say, actually, yeah, they do, then yeah, maybe we should move this resolution forward. Or if their answer is, well, actually, no, you know, it really doesn't, then this resolution is premature. Earlier, I was open to potentially entertaining this substitute resolution because we were under the impression that there is some kind of urgency. We had people protesting, shouting about bulldozers, but we found out this morning that information was provided that's not necessarily the case. The exigency, as you mentioned when we were meeting, is not there. So I think that it behooves us, if we are willing to have a public hearing on the original resolution 228, and if the urgency is not there for us to push forward this substitute version without affording everybody an opportunity to communicate how this may or may not play out, I don't think we need to do that. I would prefer that if we're going to substitute this version, that we do have a public hearing on this substituted version to get everybody's feedback and potentially have this roundtable discussion so that we can get the answers. Otherwise, we're passing a resolution asking for a pause on something that we do not know may need to be paused at this juncture. If the CNMI cases are immaterial to the buildup on Guam, then asking for a pause until those cases are adjudicated is inappropriate. It's like asking for a pause on a completely unrelated court case, if that may or may not be the case. So I raise an objection to substituting this version on the floor. I think that if we're going to do this version, we should have that roundtable discussion, as was mentioned by our colleague. We should ask the very plain question. Do the CNMI cases have any bearing on the Guam military buildup and the plans that you have in place for that? Again, if the answer is yes, by all means, let's move this resolution forward. If the answer is no, then we really shouldn't be.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard on the objection? Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with concern regarding the document that was provided as a matter of I don't believe this to be a valid document. If you read it, what's provided to us, it begins with the word finally, comma, usually meaning the ending or last paragraph or in final thought, while you have other portions of the letter that's been didacted. So I believe it's inappropriate for us to consider this if we don't understand the full context of the letter. Furthermore, if this were official legislative correspondence requesting the body as opposed to a military service member lobbying a particular senator to move this body towards a specific direction with regards to delaying the resolution, then I think it should have been official correspondence like the testimony we had received regarding the resolution that was provided to the entire body. But nowhere in this official document, in this official transmission to the legislature, was there any request to delay the resolution. So I believe that the ability or the opportunity to address concerns was already met via official transmission. And so again, you know, I ask my colleagues to reconsider anytime you see things that have been blacked out, especially with that saying as a final paragraph, I think it's very misleading and disingenuous to what we're trying to do here. And to understand and take this as the gospel, I think is inappropriate. There have been many opportunities to have roundtable discussions, but I believe the events with the resolution and events over the weekend, it's unfortunate that it took those events for them to finally offer up the ability for a roundtable. But the question is, there's no set date, there's no requested time. There's no guarantee whether this is genuine and whether they're going to make good on what they're requesting or offering, which is a potential roundtable with both the legislature and the constituents concerned with these activities. I believe there was plenty of time for them to address it. This is not a new issue. We all know that. And I find it highly unlikely, based on the letter by Admiral Chatfield, that they're saying they've been proactive in much of what they're doing. Well, I really don't feel that they've been proactive with meeting the concerns of the people and meeting with the legislature regarding those concerns. Thank you.
Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to stand and also share a similar concern with our colleagues from Talafofo now, Deredu. You know, with regards to the transition and the proposed substituted version and the material difference from my perspective, Mr. Speaker, because it now reaches, initially it was regarding the live fire training range, but now there are additional stipulations that are being added here that would tie it to a litigation until such time that all those litigation matters are addressed. And I believe that there has been sufficient efforts in regards to making sure that information is provided. Mr. Speaker, with regards to the communication that I have received, I think it's pretty clear. There was a concern about the sense of urgency about bulldozing. There was a response provided by the Chief of Staff of the Admiral with regards to that. And let me say this idea about a presupposition roundtable discussion, that was a statement that I publicly stated here. And you know that when I say that in fact a roundtable discussion is forthcoming and that we have received commitments from subject matter experts from Joint Region Marianas to sit at the table, to entertain questions, to present the status of some of the ongoing activities with regards to the buildup and its impact on Litegzan and Finagazan, then certainly that is what we are pressing forward with. So to even be questioned as to whether in fact, after a public pronouncement is made, Mr. Speaker, by yours truly, that roundtable discussion will not be conducted based on the information that I shared, I take personal deference to that, Mr. Speaker. Another thing, Mr. Speaker, I want to share with you is, and I certainly hope our colleagues will be here, I'll give you a date and I will give you a time. It's October 4th at 4 p.m. So, Mr. Speaker, the information, the notification is all being disseminated today, and I just recently, a few minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, signed that notification because I wanted to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that our military partners, the individuals who are carrying out these construction activities, that they are sitting at the table so that they can respond to questions that have been raised over the course of the last 2 days by members of this body. It all comes down to continuing that dialogue, having healthy discussions in terms of getting factual information. And when I refer to factual information, Mr. Speaker, you take a look at the original resolution, and I commend the sponsor for proposing to amend it to reflect additional information or a different perspective, because a lot of the information in there was responded directly to by the Admiral in her letter. So, Mr. Speaker, I certainly stand in deference to the statement of the previous speaker, and I share the concern that was relayed by our colleague from Talafofo/Deredu in regards to, at least from my perspective, what's the rush? There will be a roundtable discussion on Wednesday, October 4th at 4 p.m. with our military partners, and the invitation is also extended to individuals and families that would be directly impacted by the activities of this military buildup, specifically in Finagazan as well as in Litegzan. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand with that expression of my concern with regards to the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I request a recess.
We'll take a short recess. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion objecting to the substitution? There's been I wanted everybody in so that we could vote on the objection. We're missing 2 members. We can proceed, but stay in recess for a few minutes. The legislature's back in session. All the members are present. There's been a motion. There's been an objection to the substitution. All those in favor of the motion to substitute, please indicate by raising your hand.
Mr. Speaker, I request that we do a roll call.
Mr. Speaker, I also request for a roll call.
All right. There's been 3 requests for a roll call. Roll call.
Senator Ada? Senator Ada, nay. Senator Uggan? Senator Uggan, pass. I'm sorry. Senator Uggan, nay. Senator Castro? Senator Castro, aye. Speaker Cruz? Speaker Cruz, aye. Senator Espadon? Senator Espadon, pass. Senator Esteves? Senator Esteves, aye. Senator Lee? Senator Lee, aye. Senator Morrison? Senator Morrison, aye. Senator Muñoz? Senator Muñoz, aye. Senator Nelson? Senator Nelson, aye. Senator Rodriguez? Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator San Augustine? Senator San Augustine, aye. Senator San Nicolas? Senator San Nicolas, nay. Vice Speaker Chalahi? Vice Speaker Chalahi, aye. Senator Torres? Senator Torres, pass. Senator Espadon? Senator Espadon, pass. Senator Torres? Senator Torres, aye. Senator Espadon. Senator Espadon, aye.
Motion to accept received 12 ayes, 3 nays. Motion to accept is duly passed. On the motion, it's resolution as substituted. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I place to move resolution number as substituted 228-34 on the third reading file and would like to discuss.
You're recognized.
Okay. Resolution number 228-34 is relative to calling for a pause on construction and pre-construction activities related to the U.S. Department of the Navy's proposed live fire training range complex at Northwest Field until final determinations are made by the U.S. Department of Defense as to the series of associated live fire training ranges in Guam and the CNMI. And all related active litigation is resolved in order to ensure the protection of the environmental and cultural resources of the northern coastline of Guam. Whereas on September 20, 2010, the Department of the Navy issued its record decision based on the final environmental impact study issued earlier that year, pursuant to which the U.S. Department of Defense would relocate approximately 8,600 Marines from Okinawa to Guam, and as part of the process, construct and operate a series of live fire ranges, not only in Guam, but throughout the Marianas. And where shortly after the release of the record of decision, the Navy assessed the nature of the need for said live fire ranges, culminating in the release in 2015 of a supplemental environmental impact statement, evaluating alternative locations for the development of a live fire training range complex on Guam, a decision the Navy had deferred in 2010. Whereas the Navy stated it would analyze the impacts of the relocated Marines live fire training range on Tinian and Pagan in an entirely separate EIS, namely the CNMI Joint Military Training, EIS, a draft which was issued in April 2015. Whereas in August 2015, the Navy issued another record of decision based on the SEIS. This second record of decision affirmed the Navy's 2010 decision to relocate Marines from Okinawa to the Marianas, despite the lack of analysis of the live fire training on Tinian and Pagan. And whereas in February 2016, the Navy announced its plan to issue a revived draft CJMT EIS, which has yet to be released. Whereas on July 27, 2016, Earth Justice representing concerned citizen groups in the CNMI filed a lawsuit under the National Environmental Policy Act in the United States District Court for the Northern Marianas, alleging inter alia that the proposed live firing training ranges in Guam and the CNMI were cumulative and connected actions. Under NEPA, which should have been considered under a single EIS, and that the Navy had failed to consider alternatives in compliance with federal law. And whereas La Legislatura finds that the aforementioned legal questions should be fully disposed of by the appropriate courts, and final determinations made by the DoD as to the series of associated live firing training ranges in both Guam and the CNMI. In order to avoid potential irreversible impacts to the environmental and cultural resources of the northern coastline of Guam, including but not limited to the 1,000 acres of pristine limestone forests. And be it resolved that Iminay 34 na Legislature in Guahan does hereby call for a pause on construction and pre-construction, including but not limited to clearing, grading, and removing activities related to the U.S. Department of the Navy's proposed live fire training range complex at Northwest Field, and until final determinations are made by the DoD as to the series of associated live fire training ranges in Guam and the CNMI. and all related active litigation is resolved in order to ensure the protection of the environmental and cultural resources of the northern coastline of Guam. And be it further resolved that the Imanay Transaiquancho Nahilasutoran Guahan does hereby urge the Honorable Edward J.B. Calvo, Imagalahan Guahan, and the Honorable Madeline Z. Berdalio, Guam Delegate to the United States Congress, to join with Legislatura in this call for a pause on construction and construction activities related to the U.S. Department of the Navy's proposed live-fire training range complex at Northwest Field for the reasons stated herein, and be it further resolved that the Speaker certify and the Legislative Secretary attest to the adoption hereof, and that copies of the same be thereafter transmitted to the U.S. Department of Interior, to the Honorable Madeline Z. Berdalio, the Honorable Edward J. B. Calvo, Imagalahan Guahan. You know, my colleague made a good point. Yes, this is different, but it still focuses on the same mission and goal, and that was to bring a pause on construction and pre-construction activities related to the U.S. Department of the Navy's proposed live-firing training range complex. This is about giving us more time. And the urgency is 2 months is not a long way from now, if we go by the letter that was handed out. There's an urgency. The public sees it. I don't know why we don't. The people of Guam has fought this since 2009, 2010. I myself had to go to almost every town hall meeting that I can remember, testify in front of the legislature, give our generation an opportunity to enjoy what you were able to enjoy as children, the way you were raised, the way you lived. Our culture is a part of land. Our parents teach us to farm. Our parents teach us to fish. Our parents teach us to go out into the jungle and find what we need to eat. And it's always a treasure for us. If we don't stand up now, if we sit silent and do nothing and wait for a roundtable hearing when we see the public's outcry, for me, it sends one message: we do not hear you. These people elected us into office, and our job is to serve them first, not our special interests. Not set the dollar over the value of a life and our culture. Para by who protehids and who defendi I hinengi, I kultura, I lenguaje, I ari, I hanam zanitana tomorrow. This is what we stand for. Why will we deny ourselves this? Why will we deny the people this? Why will we deny them our action? This is a call for a pause. Let's not get this skewed. Please. We are calling them to come back, and we are calling on our governor and our congresswomen to join us so that we stand as one united body, which was the purpose of this delay in a day. Please do not get this confused. My colleagues, I thank you. I thank you for all the hard work that you committed to yesterday. And I humbly, humbly ask that if you're feeling conflicted, you remember the inifresi. You remember the inifresi that we stand up every time before session and we recite. Are they a mere words to us? Or when we do the benedición, do we just do it so that people think that we advocate for these things? So that we can get likes? Because if we don't see this as an urgency, the public outcry has made it very clear that it is an urgency. My colleagues, I humbly ask for your support. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion? Senator Rodriguez, then Senator San Nicolas. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to my colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution as substituted on the floor. Mr. Speaker, last night before dinner, of course, my whole family, I was there, my wife, our daughter, our two boys, 5-year-old boy. He's the one who always does the prayer in Chamorro. But after that, last night, for some reason, after he did the prayer, our 11-year-old boy did the inifresi with action. And I didn't know that he and the 5-year-old, actually, they both know how to say it in Chamorro and with the action. And I know I was talking to my good colleague here, I think it was a few weeks ago, and I said, you know, there's actually actions to the inifresi. You know, so he said, yes, you know, he also understands that. But, Mr. Speaker, if you can please indulge me. This is something we recite every morning before we start our session. This is something that the schools recite as young as my 5-year-old boy in kindergarten. It's the inifresi. Kinin imastakulu gi hinasoku, imastakulum gi corazonhu, zanimasfigu na niña sinahu, hu orphan maitzazu, para by hu protehi, zan hu defendi, I hinengi, I cultura, I lenguaje, I airi, I hanam zanitanu tomorrow. Ni iren shaku derechu ginin azu ustata. Esti hu afitma, gihilu I Biblia, zan I bandera hu, I bandera guahan. From the highest of my thoughts, from the deepest of my heart, and with the utmost of my strength, I offer myself to protect and to defend the beliefs, the culture, the language, the air, the water, and the land of the Chamorro, which are inherent God-given rights. This I will affirm by the holy words of our banner, the flag of Guahan. Mr. Speaker, what we're doing here today with Resolution 228 is what we must do as leaders, as representatives of our people, is letting our voices be heard, letting our people's voices be heard. This resolution, Mr. Speaker, I've heard that others may say this is anti-military, anti-the USA. I beg to differ, Mr. Speaker, because I am a proud American. I'm a Filipino who was born and raised in Guam, married to a beautiful Chamorrita, and I have beautiful kids who are both Chamorro and Filipino. But it's our obligation, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that when it comes to protecting our lands, our culture, our air, our language, as leaders, we must be able to express what it is our people want. And that's basically what this resolution is doing. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, And I must say it because I always wonder, with years and even decades, and you have said it, Mr. Speaker, the time that your experience in letting your voice be heard, letting our people's voice heard through your actions. Is anyone really listening? Are we really getting what we're asking for our people? Sometimes I wonder. But it's the underlying why we're not being looked at seriously, I believe, Mr. Speaker, and I'll say it, is because of our political status. And that has to do with everything, whether it's this issue with the lands up at Litexan, whether it's health care for our people, that our island and our people are always left out, whether it's this issue with our economic, what we're experiencing with our economy now, with H-2 visas not being approved for construction outside the fence. Who is listening to us? Sometimes I feel like we can shout at the top of the mountain, Mount Santa Rosa, but no one's listening. But it doesn't mean we stop. It doesn't mean that we let our voices die. And that's what Resolution 228 is saying, and that's what the message that we're saying, that we're letting the powers that be know that you must listen to us. Our spirits are not going to die, our voices are not going to die, and you must listen to us. Come to the table. And so, Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to support this effort. I want to thank the people in our community who have come out and to the public hearings, the protests. It's a way for us to express our voices, for them to express their voices. And so as leaders, as their representatives, we must do the same in this hall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nicholas and then Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I first want to begin by commending the two previous speakers. It was very eloquently put, their sentiments. It's actually quite interesting, and I find myself oftentimes seeing things from a different angle, not necessarily disagreeing, but definitely seeing things from a different angle. And today, I'm going to talk about the Inifresi also, because I was standing here reciting that pledge. It's a pledge. And I take pledges very seriously. And I recite that pledge. And as I was reciting it before this session, as we do before every session, there's something that I realized in the recitation. And I want to talk about that as part of my discussion on the resolution. I know the Inifresi by heart and Chamorro, but the English translation I'm still not very good at. So I pulled it up online. And first of all, I want to just take a moment to recognize the late Dr. Bennett Camacho Dunca, who was the author of the original Inifresi and who put this into our society. It is a beautiful thing that we have this pledge. And with all due respect to her, and with all due respect to this issue, as I was reciting this pledge, I realized that there's something missing. You see, when we take this pledge, we offer to protect and to defend the beliefs, the culture, the language, the air, the water, and the land of the Chamorro. I take that pledge with all my heart. But as I think about this military buildup, as I think about this firing range, as I reflect on this pledge, which I did this morning, I realize there's something missing. The people. Protect and defend the people. And I raise this point, Mr. Speaker, because in the context of this military buildup, I am in support of it. And it's not because I'm colonized, it's not because I'm anti any kind of self-determination, it's not because I kowtowed to a military power. is because of the story of our people. We have more Chamorros living in San Diego than we have in some of our villages. We have more Chamorros living in the States than we have living on this island, Mr. Speaker. And while some may say that it's all because our self-determination has not been resolved, it's because we have more so, in my opinion, failed to take the opportunities that we have and translate those opportunities into reasons for our people to stay. The people of Guam don't want to just leave island because they feel like it. They leave because there's no opportunity. Most of our people who join the military do so because they can't get a good paying job anywhere else. So they can have health care because we can't provide it. So their kids can go to a Dodea school because our schools are falling apart. They're willing to go fight and die overseas because of family, which is something else that isn't in Efresi. And don't mind me, I get a little emotional about this. Because there are those in this community who would point at people like me who support this buildup and say that we don't love our island and we don't love our land. The whole reason why I fight the way I do on this floor is because I love our people. This firing range, no matter where we put it, is going to have an impact. When they wanted to put it up at Pauget, and our people rose up, and I was so inspired. I was like, wow. Students, everybody coming out. And I was so inspired that the military listened. We try and make it seem like they're doing all these things to us, and they listened, Mr. Speaker. Everything was put on hold. Countless, thousands of hours of planning. We think about ourselves here, but they made so much effort over there. They stopped. Our people stopped them, and they listened. And so they tried to move it into a place that's close to where their base is, where the traffic isn't going to be as bad. And yeah, God, there's people, our own people are going to be affected by that. Retidian landowners are going to be affected by that. The ecology is going to be affected by that. Mr. Speaker, that's going to happen anywhere we put this firing range. If we don't want the firing range, then let's just say so, but let's also understand that firing range is a linchpin of this entire buildup. And if we don't want that firing range and we want to just say so, then let's also just say that we don't want the military buildup. I do. I do, because I believe that the economic opportunities that it's going to create for our people is going to give us this one shot that we've blown several times in our history, this one shot to be able to get these resources together so we can fix our schools, fix our hospital, fix our economy, and create the opportunities to keep our people here on this island so that more of them live on Guam and not someplace else. So that more language speakers are here. I can't speak the language. So that more cultural practitioners are here. I totally relate to all the passionate reasons why people don't want this firing range and why people even are opposed to the military buildup. And there were statements made earlier about the dollar and everything like that. But I have a very unique view about economics. I don't just challenge all the borrowing and the lack of deposits into tax refunds because I want to get likes. I get shouted at, Mr. Speaker, for wanting to repeal pay raises. And I take these stands because we need to marshal these resources to improve the quality of life of our people. We have dropped the ball so badly that we need a military buildup and the infusion that it's going to provide to try and get ourselves back on track. This is straight up honest talk, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there are all kinds of issues that we need to address the federal government. We need to work together to tackle them together. But as I reflect on the Unifresi and what we really should add in there, the people, the family, I think of all those families who don't live here. And I'd say 99% of them would love to come home if we only created the opportunities for them. The military, Mr. Speaker, is one of the key components of our economy right now. It's, as much as we would not want to admit it, it's true. Until we diversify that and create a new economic resource, that's something that we're going to be dependent on. And I wanted to speak about that also, Mr. Speaker, because I graduated from the University of Guam. I have a history degree. And one of the things you learn in history is that it has a tendency to repeat itself. When I was a teacher for a short time up at Simon Sanchez, I was able to illustrate it for the students by showing them that history repeats itself in a spiral form. It's not necessarily circular, there's progress, but it has a tendency to have the same kind of occurrences. Back in the early 90s, we had the base realignment and closure here on Guam. Ship repair facility closed, Naval Air Station closed. The number of military personnel went from 7,500 down to about 3,000, which is what we have around today. Now at the time, tourism was strong, which is the other leg of our economy. And while the bases closed and a lot of people lost their jobs, it affected the economy, but we were still able to continue humming along a little bit because tourism was still strong. Then we had the Asian economic crisis, the Korean airline crash, and both legs of our stool got kicked out from under us. The bases closed from BRAC, and tourism sunk. And what happened? Pain, Mr. Speaker. People left island, those who stayed struggled. And right now, today, Mr. Speaker, as history seems to repeat itself in that spiral form, I see our tourism under threat. This is, when the North Koreans fired that missile, the first thing I put out there was, watch out for tourism, and people were criticizing me. Oh, you only care about the tourists? I mean, no. If our tourism industry begins to sink, our people begin to suffer, jobs become more scarce. More people leave island, the culture degrades, the language goes away even more. So we have tourism under threat now, repeating itself the same way as the economic crisis and the Korean airline crash years ago. The Japan flights are getting canceled from Delta. The H-2 issue, which is a federal issue, is regardless of that, it's an issue. It's a local issue. It's affecting local construction. Something that we do need to resolve. And now the military buildup, this other leg, similar to the base closure that we had back in the early 90s, now we're going to willingly push out this military buildup. This pause is not just some pause for a couple months, it could be a couple years. This buildup's already 10 years behind. We have delegations from our own Guam chamber on their own dime trying to fly to the States to encourage this buildup for their own purposes. But for me, when I look at it and I see the economic opportunities that this is going to create and the opportunity for us to get it right and invest on our island and make our lives better here for our people, I'm worried about a pause. I'm worried about us communicating that we don't want this firing range as a roundabout way of saying we don't want a military buildup. I wish things were different. I wish that when we had all that surplus back in the late 80s, early 90s, instead of giving out all the tax rebates and doing all the political stuff that we have a tendency to do today, we invested on this island. We created those opportunities. It's something I fight for every day today, but we didn't back then. We struggle to do that today. And it leaves us with very little opportunity to be able to have an infusion of resources to create the opportunities here so that our people and our families can thrive. And when the people and the families stay here on Guam and thrive here on Guam, they'll take care of the land. So yes, Mr. Speaker, the Unifresi, let's not just look at what's there, but let's also look at what's not. On another note, and as I was sitting here, or standing, and this is something I think a lot of us relate to, because we have a lot of family members in the military. When we did the Imalazan Mastakilu na Sacrificiu, when we recognize those who made the ultimate sacrifice, I always take pause. My cousin Henry, the late Henry St. Nicholas Afashar, was the oldest grandson. He was the strongest, the smartest, the most charming of us all. The oldest grandson of Enrique Santos Nicholas and Francisca Borjas Nicholas. God, everybody loved Henry. He was the highest ranking soldier to fall in Afghanistan, major, fighting for our freedom. We recognize all these people who made the ultimate sacrifice every day. And then I realized, you know, while we contextualize the firing range within the context of how it impacts our culture, our ecology, you know, the landowners, which is all things that we must always respect, it's a firing range. And yet, for the United States and national security, it trains troops to shoot. We have 9 names, 9 Marines on that list who made the ultimate sacrifice. Dozens more who made the ultimate sacrifice. If this firing range can train just one Marine to fire just one bullet at just 1 degree of a better angle to save one Chamorro life, or one American life, or even just any life, was that investment worth it? We have so many of our sons and daughters deployed. This firing range isn't just some military project. It trains troops to shoot, to not only defend freedom, but to protect the lives of our own people who are out there fighting too, who just so happen to be in the military fighting, yes, because they love their country, but also because they're providing for their family, because we have failed to build an economy that's going to allow them to do so without having to sign up and join the service. Let's at least let them learn to shoot better. And if not Letekzen, and I've brought this up to all of my colleagues, then where? We said no to Paget, they listened. Now no to Letekzen. Letekzen's been on the list for 2 years. If not there, then where? Unless we say nowhere, and then we don't want a firing range, and we don't want a military buildup, and we don't want to contribute to the ability of our soldiers to help defend our own sons and daughters better. I look at things differently, Mr. Speaker. And I humbly ask my colleagues to consider this perspective. God, I wish we had other options. But when you weigh everything out there for me, I think that this is an option that we have to take. I think we have to make the most of it, given the sacrifice that it represents. I think that we should not squander the opportunity. And I promise the people and the families and everything else in that interface, I promise I'm going to fight hard to make sure that that one shot that we're going to get with this build-up is going to go to improving the quality of life for our people. So many make the ultimate sacrifice. It's the least we can do to follow through. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me for the opportunity to comment in support of Resolution 228. Mr. Speaker, you know, I know we went around earlier on a roll call and to determine if this body would accept the substitute version of Resolution 228. And there was 3 no votes. And Mr. Speaker, I hope that was not to be political at all. Those 3 no votes, they must also be recognized, at least brought into light with our community, that these 3 no votes from our colleagues have contributed heavily to this resolution. Their position is, I respect, but I have to say that we have to recognize the fact that they have contributed in a very positive way to this resolution this past few days. Mr. Speaker, I stated at the public hearing, I was there for about 5 hours. I know there was an information hearing that lasted hours as well. And I certainly didn't want to take our community back into another session like that. I think they've spoken enough. They're out protesting in every sector of this community. I stated to many of you, I also stated at the public hearing that having a connection with a Southern historical site, a very significant site called Fua, that my family has an attachment for many generations. I looked at the family members sitting in the back seat of that public hearing, and I just couldn't even imagine what my mother, particularly my mother, or whatever sibling she had left, how she will feel to see history, her land, completely erased from this earth. So I felt that connection, Mr. Speaker, with these family owners. In particular, I know it's generated legs out there of our community, from the millennials to our youth. It is out there. But in particular, those landowners, I just couldn't imagine what my family would go through if this was to happen to them. Mr. Speaker, I want to point out this segment in the many information. I know there's been a lot of information shared regarding this firing range, the EIS, the ROD, but here's a particular section. I know that it's been pointed out many times, but it needs to be very clear. Under this alternative, there will be more adverse effects from construction at North Westfield than any of the other live firing training ranges complex alternatives. There will be more adverse effects from operations under Alternative 5 than under any of the other alternatives. I said to many of us, Mr. Speaker, these words didn't come from us. These words didn't come from the Latetza Patei group. This didn't come from any youth organization, university. This came from our military partners and those in authority. So this just tells me, despite their own study, their own warnings, their own findings, that it doesn't make sense. But it still somehow makes sense to them to still move forward. I stated, Mr. Speaker, that this is a situation that I think our military partners have to be very serious about. I believe that this decision will have long-term consequences. Yes, the firing range may still proceed. We are hoping maybe there's another alternative, perhaps an alternative 6, and positions change. But what I'm concerned about, Mr. Speaker, is when that question always rose up in our forums in the past, throughout our campaigns, what is your position in the military buildup? I've always stated that I'm all for a closer relationship with the United States, whatever it'll take. But when you see that a information that they put out, it's just that in my good conscience, I just can't accept the fact that these folks would not adhere to their own findings. And I really believe that they're creating something I hope to not see, a relationship that is tarnished over time. And despite, yes, all the economic opportunities that we could point out, hopefully bring the 150,000 folks of our Chamorros back home because of economic opportunity, I still think that there is a lasting consequence to this that will eventually, over time, repeat the story, the unfortunate story of Okinawa. That took time, but over time, we now see what's happening with Okinawa. They didn't listen. The political landscape has changed because of the pressures put on by their people on their government. And now they're looking for another place. Mr. Speaker, when I say I'm all for a closer relationship with the United States, I really mean it. My position is really to look out in the best interests of all parties. I really feel that if this decision continues to move, as I stated, I learned from the testimony, I watched the free association status groups, the different groups that are now seeming to align themselves with an independent movement. They were there at the public hearing. One of them testified that the only opportunity that can prevent this from moving forward or happening again is an independent Guam. I don't say that, Mr. Speaker, to claim any position on any political status, but it's really forcing this community to reevaluate this whole movement with regards to our political status now. And as you can see, not only of our millennials and our youth, yes, our Manamko have fought very hard for their lands, but you're seeing you're seeing clearly that this is not going to end regardless wherever this fire range is put. I just want to close by saying that our military partners, the authorities need to figure out, yes, I look forward to the roundtable discussion, but they need to answer to their own findings, their study. Why are they going counter to their own information? That's my whole point here. It just makes things a little more confusing for our people. There will be more adverse effects from the operations under Alternative 5 than under any of the other alternatives. I want a good relationship with the military, Mr. Speaker, and this is not helping. They can move forward. Yes, it's within their footprint. But is that what they want to live with? Do they want to live with a neighbor that continuously welcomes it, embraces it, and harnesses the relationship and strengthens it? Or we're just going to have a continuous, as you see, we saw what's happening out there. A continuous protest is the whole movement, regardless if the fire range is already built, until this government is forced to be in a position like Okinawa. That's what I hope to not see, Mr. Speaker. It happened somewhere else. And if we can't learn from the unfortunate story of Okinawa and letting these little seeds being planted in our youth, in our millennials, and seeing this, we better be cautious of what's to come. We may only see things now. So, Mr. Speaker, I know there was a lot of work that went into this. I thank you for calling us into caucus to really figure out how to move forward on this. I do thank all those family members, all these organizations, those who produced those videos of our youth in our community that are concerned about this, allowing them to have a voice in whatever platform it may be, but they had a platform to have a voice, even though they didn't show up to the public hearing. That's very, very important. And I think we have to take that all into consideration. I just ask our military, when we have that roundtable discussion going forward, to answer to their own findings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Morrison. Senator Esteves, and then Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too was going to speak about, oath of office and the infresi and the pledge, but I definitely can outdo the articulation that was put forth by previous speakers. There have been many arguments made that supporting this resolution or having particular issues with aspects of the buildup and just typical citizen discourse about the issue itself and militarization, that it makes somebody anti-military, anti-American. And I don't buy it. I don't buy it. But this is such an important time in our history on this island. This is where we really make the determination, and that's what we're doing. We're doing it in policy, and we're doing it in the community. And it's a question that needs to be answered, along with the question of political status, is what means more to the people of Guam today, money or culture? And for the people out there protesting and expressing their concerns, for a lot of them, it is really that simple. What are we saying today is more important to us? Money and culture. Money or culture. And I think about this because I made this decision. There's discussion and a lot of arguments about, the military and all the things that they do and why people leave island to join the military. And I really, I find it funny somebody telling me why I joined, especially if they never put on a uniform, and telling me my reasons. Because I believe we should fight for what's important. And I prefer to be shouted at than shot at. And both have happened. But we must continue to fight for the things that we believe in, whether or not it puts us on opposite ends. But the questions need to be answered. What is more important to us? Money or culture? I could have had my full career when I served as a veteran in the Army on active duty. I could have. There were many options available to me. I had a very distinguished career. But through all those hardships that I saw and went through, it made me realize something. that I had been blind to, that money is not everything. And I could speak for myself, having donned the uniform, that culture meant something to me. And that's what brought me home. That's why I moved home, to give back to my community, to start my life here, to start my family here, to be raised the way I was raised, to have opportunities to see and experience the culture the way I did, because that's what I wanted for my children. That's what I wanted them to be exposed to as I made the decision to start my family. And when I fight, and when I put myself out there, and when I take a stand on a divisive issue, it's because, as I've said before, I don't want to look at my daughter and tell her, I didn't fight for your heritage. I stood by. I let everybody else tell you that your culture, your heritage, what makes you who you are is not good enough. It's not important. That money is the new God. And that when I took the pledge in the interfresi before God, that I didn't really mean it. Because the other God, money, was more valuable. Mr. Speaker, we can always make more money. Money can always be made. There will always be, that's the one thing I learned. You can always make more money. Maybe it's not a lot, maybe it's a little, but you can always make more. But when you take something away, when you destroy something, there is no potential. There is no possibilities. That only comes with life. And so I'm in full support of this resolution. That we should pause, that we should ask the questions. This doesn't make me anti-buildup. This doesn't make me anti-military, obviously. And for many of those out there, them getting pegged in that light, that's very unfair. But it is the most American thing to do, to speak up when you feel you're not being heard, to speak up when you have an issue. Because if we don't do that, this isn't a democracy. It's not what I fought for. It's not what I went out there and put my life on the line for. So that people can't speak out, so they're not heard. Now add on top of that, the difficulties of democracy that we have already, and the bureaucracy and systems that the people have to follow. Now tack on the fact that of our political status, where people don't have the same avenues, where the 10th Amendment doesn't apply to Guam or any form of sovereignty as a state. So there are many issues with this. This is such a deep issue. But if we are all so very insistent within the community to paint this into a black and white issue, into an all or nothing issue, either to make a decision or to realize that we all need to take time to look at this more closely and to self-actualize and self-realize what is important to us individually, because I went through that moment, and many have in the community. What is more important to us right now? And what is more important to us looking into the future of Guam? Money or our heritage and culture? So I urge my colleagues to support this resolution so that we can hold off, we can protect what we have. And whether it takes another year, 1 year, 2 years, that's of little consequence when you think about destroying something that took thousands of years to develop, when you talk about the limestone forest or a cultural heritage potentially thousands of years old. Are we willing to just throw that away for a quick buck? Because money comes and money goes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Ada?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in opposition to Resolution 228. And last night, in the middle of the night, I woke up to write my thoughts down because I felt that it was important that I express myself. Now, I find it particularly difficult to stand here and take the position that I'm taking because it is contrary to literally family. My sister was the first one that stood up, came forward at the public hearing to give testimony. She's the spouse of a military retiree, but despite that, she stepped forward and she voiced her objection, knowing full well where I stood with the matter. I find it also difficult because my very cousin, second cousin, Juan Flores, the direct descendant of Benigno Flores, is a cousin of mine. And I know the position that he's taking, and my position is contrary to his. So I'm going directly contrary to family, not just some faceless protesters out there. I'm actually going against family. And most especially because my great-grandfather was a landowner at Retidian, a large landowner who fell victim to the land taking. And so one would think that I would be out there also fighting to get Letexan back. Now, we've had the younger members that have stood up before me are certainly very eloquent, and I'm not going to even try to match their eloquence. I'm not going to try and match that in the hopes of maybe convincing anyone to see things differently. But I'm speaking up not in opposition of Resolution 228 because obviously initially Resolution 228 was to prohibit the construction of the live fire training range. And then it got kind of watered down to just a pause, hoping that buy us more time and whatnot. But in reality, what's going to happen is after that pause is over, it will be renewed again to prohibit it. Now, but I think it's important that I need to state why, despite the fact that I'm going contrary to family, the Inafresi was brought up to almost put one on a guilt trip as if you were committing treason if you did not support the resolution. I've got to ask myself, well, we all see things differently. And we all come from different backgrounds and have different values. So what makes you so right and me so wrong in taking the positions that you do or the position that I take? So, I quite frankly, I resent the use of the Inafresi to try and put someone on a guilt trip. That when you go contrary to what's being voiced out there, that, hey, what happened to the Inafresi, the pledge that you've been taking? And in accomplishing that, the live fire training range is very much a part of that. And inasmuch as I do not want to see our pristine limestone forests destroyed or put at risk whatever ancestral ties that we have out there, I believe that if there's any sacrifice that is going to be made, the sacrifice is necessary. Now, I'm a military retiree, and in the 26 years of active and reserve duty, I must say I've never been assigned to a combat zone. That card just was not in the deck that I was dealt. But I had the opportunity while stationed in Germany to have visited several of the concentration camps that were there. And it was during those visits that I came to realize that the service that I was giving by putting on the uniform and the role that our armed forces plays is very important. And it's important that we maintain the strength of our armed forces to keep things like what had happened in those concentration camps. Listening to the stories of our war survivors also is a very valuable experience. And so those experiences, those were my experiences that helped to shape basically where I will take my stand. And I believe that it is my duty then to support this military buildup. And along with that comes the live fire training range. Pues zao na be songan be pula gifinot samorum na maput paraguaho na pabitogi gini sa pabi kontra mismo si luho mismo primuho además si tataho biho gaitano maamot ni tano na gi papa pues pabitogi gini sa pabialok tazagwa manata sopoti zi firing range lo hininggekul kina importante este na para tana medgut e Fetsonia e os Estados Unidos ni Sinao protege e tanota dani nasyon sa zanggen edu para contribution tay para tanagwaha tonu ni pro Sinao fan train i sindolu siya tamano fan mamaki pues mena sa eno tanoi lo gof mapuristi na momento sa mismo familia man tisina man acomprendi lo mena sa nisita tafanogi sa tisina na ta todo bray para pareho na sosuta lo mas importante na zanggen hafay ninggemo togi zon susteni zon defendi hafay ninggemo pues ti zaho na pabi kontra familia lo este na momento por este na kinalamten tisinya na pabi soporti este resolution.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this resolution, and I would like to thank the sponsor and all of those who spoke before me and who attended the hearing, and actually all the senators who have had input into this. I understand that many see this resolution as a statement regarding the buildup, but I don't see it like that at all. I see it as a very focused resolution that even those who are absolutely in support of the buildup, I would hope would support, because this resolution focuses us, as the government of Guam should be focused on actual impacts of the buildup, actual logistics of it. The buildup, if I may just go back to 2010. I won't even go back before that when it was first discussed, and so many changes have been made since then. But in 2010, they finally came out with a decision, and they said they were going to put the buildup out of their, in their documents, they had, let me restart. When they first announced the buildup, it was through this NEPA process, Environmental Protection process. And the process that they gave us is that they were going to tell us what they wanted, and we get to comment. So everybody in the government of Guam went through the 11, or the agencies and the citizens of Guam went through 11,000 pages of studies and findings as to what they were. It's the first time we really found out what they were going to do in the buildup. Everything that it would entail, that it was going to include a firing range, and this is the kind of guns that would be included in the firing range, and that their top 5 places that they decided they wanted to put the firing range, those were spelled out in the buildup. I mean, in the 2010 decision. I mean, in the documents in getting up to the 2010 decision. In 2010, they made a decision. They were going to their number one priority. I'm confused now between these documents, but just a second. In 2010, in the 2010 decision, because of the I'm sorry. Let me just refresh my memory here. This is all right. According to this, well, anyways, we've been giving 5. I can't remember exactly which document it was in, but we were told that their top priority was going to be POGIT. It took a lawsuit to get POGIT off the table, and it took, and then they were required in that lawsuit, as their settlement in the lawsuit, to do a supplemental EIS, an SEIS, on where they would put the firing ranges. So they did some more studies, and they came back to us with the list where they took number 5 on the first list that we had seen and put that back up to number 1. And we heard earlier the senator from Yamadak read to us their findings on number 5 in the earlier EIS, that it was the alternative that had the most adverse impacts, according to their first study. But my point in going back to a little bit of this history is just to make this point that it was never a matter of sitting down with the government of Guam and let's negotiate where we should put this firing range. It was never even a matter of let's sit down with the government of Guam and negotiate the buildup. They announced the buildup. They gave us the process that they would accept our comments in. The government and the people, we did that. We commented. And when they announced Ritidian, the firing range at Northwest Field, that was in 2015, relatively recently. And I think ever since then, we have, as the government of Guam, the people of Guam have been, they've also put their comments in on that, and they've also tried to affect this decision, yes. Because according to our historic preservation officer, this is a place, and according to their own original findings, that had many, many historic, or much historic significance, and was our own historic preservation officer's least, or how did she claim it to be, the choice that she ranked the lowest. Now this resolution, so we're here today with Ritidian in front of us, and just last month, the military, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the military is waiting for U.S. Fish and Wildlife to come up with a biological opinion on the impacts and to give an opinion on the military's mitigation of the impacts to the area. And it's very well known that this area contains endangered species. The biological opinion discussed the significant adverse effects on endangered or threatened species from the destruction of habitat, especially the limestone forest habitat. It stated that 23 endangered or threatened species located in Micronesia, 13 were found to occur adjacent to or within the proposed project areas. And I'm quoting from this biological opinion now: the largest effects on listed species habitat in terms of habitat fragmentation will be on AAFB near Retidian Point from construction of the LFTRC. And then they list the different species endangered species that would be affected. This including, it's an occupied habitat for the Mariana fruit bat, Mariana 8-spot butterfly, B. guamensi, D. guamensi, Tuberolabium guamensi, C. micronesica, H. longipetiolata, and T. rotensis, and unoccupied habitat for the Guam tree snail, fragile tree snail, and humped tree snail. This primary limestone forest is also contiguous with the Guam National Wildlife Refuge, providing an even larger forested area serving as habitat for the above 11 listed species. In total, approximately 78 acres of primary limestone forest and 109 acres of secondary limestone forest would be permanently cleared for construction of the LFTRC. In addition to the LFTRC clearing activities, the proposed action will create a surface danger zone over approximately 68% of the wildlife refuge at Retidian Point, and the surface danger zone would cover access road, visitor center, offices, other facilities, and limit access. It documents that access would be limited for 39 out of 52 weeks of the year. Now, in other studies conducted by the military, these are from the SCIS, their findings. It was determined that due to the noise, cost, land use issues, incompatibility, and the impact to the community as a result of the live fire training range near Arunau, Litexen, Pahun, Hinapsan, Alternative 5 Retidian was not considered to be a reasonable alternative, even with the smaller danger zone footprint. The State Historic Preservation Officer, when she came before us at an informational briefing, told us that she had significant findings, and the location had multiple historical sites that would be directly and indirectly adversely impacted. She said that there were 269 historical properties counted and recorded. Of those sites, 63 were determined eligible for listing on the National Registry of Historic Places. She announced that she would submit a letter to the Advisory Council on the Historic Preservation to seek a comprehensive reevaluation of the culturally significant settlement site. And this is important because these were findings made even after the record of decision. When they made their decision to place this firing range in this spot, they had findings in front of them of the cultural impacts, the significant cultural impacts, but our SHPO is telling us that there are even more impacts than what were previously found. Now, this lawsuit that we reference in our resolution, this resolution asks for a pause of the pre-construction and construction activities. And these pre-construction activities are outlined in the biological opinion. they include, and this is the significant part of their mitigation, and these are also things that have these are the things that are going to have the impact on the endangered species in this area. They are going to remove medicinal plants, the ungulate, they're going to allow for threatened and endangered species salvage and translocation. And if you read the biological opinion in detail, it tells you in detail what they mean by that, and it means they're going to take seeds, then they're going to take seedlings, and then they're going to take what plants the butterflies land on, remove those plants out of the jungle, and this is their removal. They're removing things out of this jungle, the limestone forest, before the construction equipment comes in to clear it. So they call it, it's like a small scale clearing, because they go in and, by hand or by, at least by choice, go in and choose what they are going to remove before the bulldozing occurs. And anyways, but this lawsuit is, there's a lawsuit in the CNMI that was referenced earlier in the resolution, and the reason why we are asking for a pause is because if the decision in this lawsuit is that the military does need to redo its EIS and redo the study of where to put the firing range on Guam and include where the firing ranges in Tinian and Pagan, then we are asking for a pause of this pre-construction activity, this activity that's harmful to the endangered species, while we wait to determine whether those other firing ranges and the study on the firing ranges is going to be needed. Because that's a delay that is not caused by us, it's a delay that is caused by military action, purportedly, to not have done the SEIS correctly, or to have included, the argument is that they did not include what they were supposed to have included, and we'll see what happens in the court. Of course, I'm sure at our next roundtable, we're going to hear from them that they have put an argument in this case that this is outside of the jurisdiction of the court, and that, of course, they allege that they did it properly also. So they're asking for that this case be dismissed, and they've also asked that it's a political question that should not be decided by the courts, so that's also a potential in this case. So there are many things, but if the location of the firing range is going to be delayed by the court action or other action in relative to the Marianas training ranges that they have said are critical to the relocation of Marines to Guam, then I just believe it's reasonable to put the destruction of the limestone forest on hold until those things can be very, very firmly decided and action can really be determined.
Thank you, Senator.
Oh, may I just conclude, Mr. Speaker? There's also, a lot of talk today about, this sacrifice that we are going to make, but it's not a sacrifice that has been deliberately decided by the Guam Legislature, by the people of Guam, by the government of Guam. It's a sacrifice that has been decided by the military. And it looks from their own process that it's a sacrifice that they have determined to be fluctuating or amendable. But I believe this is a time for us prior legislatures have made it very clear that they are going to stand and defend Ritidian from additional federal control. And I think we should stand consistent with those who have stood before us, and that the property of all the original landowners is as important as, the neighboring landowners. I think it's time for us that we need to, if we can, have an actual impact in protecting our endangered species and our cultural sites and our original landowners' rights, then of course that's what the legislature should be doing. Limestone forests, they say these may be the last 5% of our pristine limestone forests that took hundreds of years to develop. So I wholeheartedly support this Resolution 228. It's absolutely not too late for us to voice our concerns about the military's choice for the site of the live fire training ranges. And I appeal to the federal government to assist us, as we did appeal to the CODEL when they visited us, to assist us in urging the military to very carefully choose a site that would have less destructive impact on our community. And I am hoping that with this resolution that the governor would also join us in a pause and asking for a pause in these pre-construction and construction activities until all the questions or all the non-firm decisions, I guess, and whether the rest of the relocation elements are actually going to occur or where they are going to occur have finally been decided. And so I thank you again, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Nelson, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I might just like to thank my colleagues for all the comments that they've made. There's one thing that I respect about this legislature is that, yes, we have our disagreements and perhaps we don't see eye to eye, but we still have that professional and collegial respect for one another. And so I thank you, and I thank you, for those that even addressed the concern about it. Thank you for that. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we go to the third reading file to vote on resolution number 228-34 without engrossment.
On the motion to move to to the voting file to vote on 228, any objection? Hearing none. Roll call. Read the title.
Resolution 228-34 COR, as substituted on the floor, introduced by Talina Cruz Nelson, relative to calling a pause on the construction and pre-construction activities related to the U.S. Department of Navy's proposed live firing range training range complex at the Northwest Field until final determinations are made by the U.S. Department of Defense as to the series of associated live fire training range in Guam and the CNMI, and all related activity litigation is resolved in order to ensure the protection of the environmental and cultural resource of the northern coastline of Guam.
Roll call.
Senator Ada. Senator Ada, nay. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, aye. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, aye. Speaker Cruz.
Aye.
Speaker Cruz, aye. Senator Espadon. Senator Espadon, aye. Senator Esteves. Senator Esteves, aye. Senator Lee.
Go back to it. Just go ahead. Continue. Through the line, and then we'll come back to it. Go to the next. Continue.
Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, aye. Senator Muñoz. Senator Muñoz, aye. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, aye. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, aye. Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Nicolas, nay. Vice Speaker Chalahi. Vice Speaker Chalahi, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, nay. Senator Lee.
Mr. Speaker, I make a motion to excuse Senator Lee from voting.
Senator Lee. Senator Lee out during roll call.
On Resolution 228-34 as substituted on the floor, the resolution received 11 aye votes, 3 nay votes, and 1 out during roll call. Resolution 228-34, COR, is duly passed by this body. At this point, let's take a recess for lunch. 3 o'clock.